The queen who gave birth to a monster. Royal inbreeding gone too far. Prologue. A dynasty's doom. In the gilded halls of Madrid's Alcazar, where tapestries whispered of conquest and chandeliers cast a deceptive glow of grandeur, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty clung to its fading glory. It was November 6, 1661, and the air was thick with incense and dread. Queen Mariana of Austria, pale and trembling, labored in a velvet-draped chamber, her cries echoing through corridors lined with portraits of her ancestors, kings and queens whose bloodlines twisted into a suffocating knot. The court held its breath, not for joy, but for fear. The child born that night, Charles II, would be no savior. He was the last gasp of a dynasty that had woven its own destruction through centuries of inbreeding, a living testament to the price of royal ambition. His birth marked not a triumph, but a tragedy, a monster, not of myth but of genetics, destined to embody the collapse of an empire. This is the story of Charles II, known as El Hechizado, the Bewitched, whose frail body and faltering mind were the culmination of a dynasty's obsession with pure blood. It is a tale of a queen's despair, a court's denial, and an empire's unraveling, where the pursuit of power through incestuous unions led to a king who could barely speak, walk, or rule. But it is also a broader saga of a Europe enthralled by divine right, of science grappling with the unseen threads of heredity, and of a society that turned a blind eye to its own decay. Charles II was not just a man, he was a warning, etched in flesh and bone, of what happens when ambition defies nature. Act 1. A cursed birth. The labor was long, the queen's agony a grim prelude to the horror that followed. Mariana of Austria, niece and wife to King Philip IV, bore the weight of a dynasty's expectations. Her marriage was no anomaly, it was the Habsburg way. Of the 11 Spanish Habsburg marriages from 1450 to 1661, 9 were consanguineous, including 2 uncle-niece unions like her own. Philip IV, her uncle and husband, was also her second cousin, their shared blood, a tangled web stretching back to Joanna the Mad and Philip the Fair. Their union was meant to secure the Habsburg grip on Spain's vast empire, from the Americas to the Philippines, but it carried a hidden cost. When Charles emerged, the midwives recoiled. His head was misshapen, scabbed and oozing from a channel in his right ear. His limbs were frail, his skin mottled with herpes-like rashes. Rumors swirled that his sex was ambiguous, a cruel ambiguity for a dynasty desperate for a male heir. The French ambassador, his quill trembling, recorded the sight. A child so frail, so deformed, that it seems more a specter than a prince. Yet the court, bound by protocol and fear, swaddled him in silk and proclaimed him the future king. The bells of Madrid rang, but their peals sounded more like a dirge. Charles's inbreeding coefficient, as calculated by modern geneticists, was a staggering 0.254, higher than that of a child born to siblings. 0.25 Fingcyst. This meant over a quarter of his genes were identical by descent, inherited from ancestors who appeared multiple times in his pedigree. His parents' union was but the final knot in a tapestry of consanguinity. His grandmother was his aunt, his great-grandmother his great-aunt. The Habsburgs, driven by limpieza de sangre, the obsession with blood purity rooted in Spain's Reconquista, had married cousins, uncles, and nieces to keep power within the family. But in doing so, they had unleashed a genetic storm. Charles's ailments were legion. Modern researchers, led by Gonzalo Alvarez at the University of Santiago de Compostela, speculate He suffered from combined pituitary hormone deficiency, causing stunted growth, infertility, and weak muscles, and distal renal tubular acidosis, leading to rickets and a disproportionately large head. His Habsburg jaw, mandibular prognathism, was so severe he could barely chew, his teeth misaligned, his tongue swollen. Portraits, though softened by artists' flattery, could not hide the jutting chin, the sunken mid-face, the vacant stare. By age 4, he had yet to walk or speak, his body a battleground of epilepsy, fevers, and digestive torment. The court, however, saw only what it wished. Mariana, now Queen Regent, cradled her son with a mother's fierce love, but also with the desperation of a dynasty on the brink. Philip IV had died in 1665, leaving a 4-year-old Charles as king and a sprawling empire in decline. The Spanish Netherlands were under siege by Louis XIV's France. The treasury bled dry by wars and colonial overreach. Mariana, ruling as regent, faced a court riven by factions. Her confidants, led by the ambitious Jesuit Juan Everardo Nithard, clashed with Don Juan José, Charles's illegitimate half-brother, who sought power for himself. The boy king, too weak to sit upright, was a pawn in their games, his frailty a secret buried beneath royal pomp. Act 2. The Illusion of Majesty. By 1675, Charles, now 14, was declared of age, though his body and mind betrayed him. He stood barely 5 feet, his frame skeletal, his legs buckled by rickets. His speech was slurred, his words few, his tongue too large for his malformed jaw. Courtiers whispered of El Hechizado, believing him cursed by witchcraft or divine wrath. Astrologers were summoned, exorcisms performed, yet no ritual could undo the truth. Charles was the product of a dynasty that had gambled with nature and lost. His courtiers, draped in velvet and denial, propped him up for ceremonies, his trembling hands clutching a scepter he could barely lift. The Spanish Empire, once the terror of Europe, was crumbling. The War of Devolution 1667 to 1668 had seen Louis XIV seize parts of the Spanish Netherlands, exploiting Spain's weakened state. The economy, drained by colonial ventures and inflation from New World silver, teetered on collapse. The court, however, maintained its illusion of grandeur. Banquets glittered, masks celebrated a king who could not dance, and diplomats bowed to a throne that held only a shadow. Charles's mother, Mariana, and her allies clung to power, exiling Don Juan José to quell his ambitions. But the empire's fractures could not be hidden, any more than Charles's deformities could be painted away. In 1679, seeking to secure the dynasty and appease France, Charles was married to Marie-Louise of Orléans, niece of Louis XIV. She was 17, vibrant and horrified by her husband's appearance. The court hoped her fertility would produce an heir, but Charles, impotent and frail, could not consummate the marriage. Marie-Louise, blamed for the failure, endured brutal fertility treatments, potions, purges, and rituals that ravaged her health. By 1689, she was dead, likely of appendicitis, her body broken by a court that refused to see the truth. Charles's infertility was not her fault, but his. His autopsy would later reveal an atrophied testicle, a final insult of his genetic curse. A second marriage followed in 1690 to Maria Anna of Neuburg, chosen for her family's reputed fertility. She too failed to produce an heir, her womb a scapegoat for Charles's barrenness. The court's desperation grew, as did the whispers of sorcery. Maria Anna, ambitious and manipulative, vied for influence, aligning with Austrian Habsburgs who eyed the Spanish throne. Meanwhile, Charles's health deteriorated. By his 30s, he was bald, senile, and racked by epileptic seizures, his body a living ruin. Yet the court persisted, dressing him in gold, parading him as a king, while Europe's powers, France, Austria, England, circled like vultures, awaiting his death. Act 3. The Cost of Denial. The Habsburgs' obsession with inbreeding was not mere caprice, it was a strategy rooted in politics and culture. The motto Bella Gerant alitu, Felix Austria nubi, let others wage war, you happy Austria marry, encapsulated their approach. Marriage alliances had built their empire, uniting Spain, Austria, and the Holy Roman Empire. But by Charles's time, the cost was clear. A 2019 study in Annals of Human Biology confirmed that the Habsburg jaw, a recessive trait, worsened with each generation's inbreeding, correlating with higher inbreeding coefficients. Charles's F-value of Mort 254 was 10 times that of Philip I, the dynasty's founder. Infant mortality in Habsburg families was 50%, compared to 20% in Spanish villages, a stark testament to inbreeding depression. The court's denial mirrored a broader societal blindness. The Spanish Inquisition, raging under Charles's reign, targeted Jews and Muslims for their impure blood, while the Habsburgs, in their quest for purity, destroyed their own lineage. Charles himself, though too feeble to rule, attended autos de fe, watching executions with a vacant stare, his court using spectacle to distract from decay. Disabled individuals, like Eugenia Martinez Vallejo, believed to have Prader-Willi syndrome, were summoned as court jesters, their suffering a cruel entertainment for a king who mirrored their pain. Psychologically, Charles was a prisoner of his condition. His limited intellect and emotional stunting, likely exacerbated by inbreeding, left him dependent on his mother, wives, and advisors. Contemporary accounts describe him as melancholic, superstitious, and prone to fits of cruelty, such as blinding horses or roasting animals alive. These behaviors suggest a mind warped by isolation and powerlessness, a king who could neither rule nor escape his role. His mother, Mariana, bore her own burden: guilt for her son's condition, fear for the dynasty, and the weight of regency in a fracturing empire. Her refusal to acknowledge Charles's incapacity was both maternal love and dynastic desperation, a refusal to admit that the Habsburg dream had become a nightmare. Act 4. The Empire's End. By 1700, Charles was a husk, his body failing, his mind adrift. Europe's powers, sensing his end, negotiated partition treaties to carve up the Spanish Empire. Louis XIV's grandson, Philip of Anjou, and Charles of Austria, a Habsburg cousin, were the leading contenders for the throne. Charles, in a rare act of agency, named Philip his heir in his will, hoping to preserve Spain's unity. But his death on November 1st, 1700, at age 38, unleashed chaos. The War of the Spanish Succession erupted, pitting France against Austria and England. Spain lost territories, its global dominance shattered, and the Bourbon dynasty replaced the Habsburgs. Charles's body, autopsied, revealed a heart the size of a peppercorn, lungs corroded, and a single shriveled testicle, a grim epitaph for a dynasty undone by its own blood. The war reshaped Europe. The Treaty of Utrecht, 1713, gave Britain Gibraltar and trade concessions, marking its rise as a global power. Spain, once the terror of the seas, became a secondary player, its empire fractured, its treasury empty. The Habsburg jaw, once a mark of divine right, became a symbol of hubris. Charles II, the last of his line, was not the cause of this decline, but its culmination, a king whose very existence exposed the folly of a dynasty that prized blood over survival. Act 5. Echoes across time. The tragedy of Charles II was not unique. Other royal houses, driven by similar ambitions, faced parallel fates. The Ptolemies of Egypt, marrying siblings to preserve their divine lineage, produced Cleopatra VII, whose brilliance masked a dynasty weakened by genetic flaws. The Romanovs, as seen in Tsarevich Alexei's hemophilia, suffered from Queen Victoria's mutated gene, their denial of his condition fueling revolution. Even the Tudors, with their strategic marriages, saw Henry VIII's heirs plagued by ill health, though less severely. Inbreeding, a tool of power, became a universal poison, its effects echoing across centuries. Modern science illuminates the Habsburg tragedy. A 2009 study by Alvarez et al. In PLOS 1 quantified the dynasty's inbreeding, showing a 17.8% increase in mortality for children of first cousin unions. Charles's dual disorders, pituitary deficiency and renal acidosis, were likely recessive traits unmasked by homozygosity. Yet some geneticists, like those in a 2013 heredity study, suggest the Habsburgs may have evolved mechanisms to mitigate inbreeding's effects, though not enough to save Charles. These findings underscore a broader truth. Nature does not bend to human ambition, no matter how divine the claim. Culturally, the Habsburg story reflects a paradox. Their obsession with blood purity, rooted in Spain's Reconquista and Limpieza de Sangre, mirrored a society that equated lineage with virtue. Yet this same society, through the Inquisition, persecuted those deemed impure, while its kings withered under their own pure blood. The court's use of disabled jesters, like Eugenia Martinez Vallejo, reveals a cruel hypocrisy, a dynasty that mocked deformity while producing it. This dissonance extended to Europe's courts, where divine right justified excess, yet hid fragility behind pomp. Psychologically, the Habsburgs were trapped by their own myth. Charles's mother, Mariana, faced an impossible choice: admit her son's incapacity and risk the dynasty, or perpetuate the illusion and doom it. Her denial was not just personal, but institutional, a court-wide refusal to confront reality. Charles himself, aware of his limitations yet powerless to escape them, lived in a gilded cage, his suffering a public spectacle. His wives, Marie Louise and Maria Anna, were victims too, their bodies and reputations sacrificed to a barren throne. The psychological toll of inbreeding extended beyond genetics, shaping a court that feared truth more than collapse. Epilogue. A warning in blood. In Charles II's tomb in the Escorial lies silent, his bones a relic of a dynasty that burned brightly and fell to ash. His life was no mere footnote, but a cautionary tale, etched in the scars of his body and the ruins of his empire. The Habsburgs, in their quest to defy time, defied nature, and nature answered with a king who could not rule, a dynasty that could not endure. Their story is a mirror to our own age, where ambition, whether for power, wealth, or legacy, can blind us to consequence. The Alcazar, once ablaze with Habsburg glory, stands quiet, its halls echoing with the ghost of a king who was never truly king. Charles II, El Hechizado, was no monster, but a man born of human folly, crowned by human denial, and buried by human greed. His blood, once the pride of a dynasty, became its poison, a warning that power unchecked consumes itself. As Europe rebuilt from the ashes of his death, the world learned a lesson too late. No throne, no matter how golden, can outrun the truth of flesh and bone.